I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this morning's webinar on Procure-to-Pay Optimization. And with that, I give you Richard and Stephanie.
Hey, cool, thanks Keith. So we're from RPI Consultants. We have a background in Procure-to-Pay processes, implementation, optimization. But for this presentation, we'll be speaking in the voice of a typical Lawson customer, right? So we'll talk about the P2P optimization project we took on at our healthcare facility based in South Florida, hence the Miami theme that we have going on. As far as our agenda today, we're going to walk through each step of the P2P lifecycle, and we'll dive in and take a look at some techniques and things we've done to help sort of improve processes, improve operations, get more visibility into what's going on. And we'll touch on some objective measures that everyone can use to sort of see how these individual processes stack up to best practices.
Excellent. So we're going to start off with inventory control, the basics, right? So we're focusing in on 3 different areas here. Number 1 is very true to my heart, data integrity. Everything, all roads really lead back to inventory control and your item master and really how you're keeping this up to date. If you don't have good standard processes and procedures in place to help manage your data, things are going to get out of hand. You can have a lot of duplicates in the system or just missing information, and what you put into the system is what you're going to get out. So all of your reports aren't going to be as valuable without that detail. So what can you do there? There's a whole lot of information that can be stored in your item master. There's the basics of making sure you have a process for how you're adding your item descriptions. There's that new description 3 that came with 10 that has 365 characters. Very, very helpful. You can just take in this information from your GPO and just feed it right in. And with a few tweaks, adding some keywords and synonyms that really can improve your requester experience to have these items be easily searchable. You also can utilize different coding of the item. So, if you've had Lawson for a while, you're probably familiar with the purchasing and inventory classes, and you're trying your best to do some detailed reporting off of them, but it's just really difficult to manage and keep up with. Well, there is the ability to store unspec codes. Again, something that you typically can get from your GPO or from tools like GHX's Nuvia, to bring that detail in and then have some detailed reporting off of that.
Yeah, and data quality, for our item master, that's not too hard to measure because we just need to create guidelines for what every IC11 record should have optimally. And then we just query the system and we want to show what percentage of records are in compliance with our guidelines.
Exactly. So with that information, digging in a little bit more to the inventory transactions is, taking the time to basically build some KPIs for yourself to really try to capture issues as proactively as you can. So here we just kind of have a quick example of showing stock out events in your warehouse.
So this is a graph of stock on hand as a function of time. And the interesting thing here is once we overlay this on a calendar, we can start to get some context here and understand what's going on. So if you move us forward to the next slide, here's how our sort of calendar timeline overlays against this data, and it starts to become a little bit more clear what are the root causes of this, right? So we're looking at AA batteries, and when did we run out? Right at the start of school season, and again right around Christmas. So maybe these are times of year we should consider bulking up on this type of item.
And next we have mobile supply chain. So if you're not utilizing this today, we would definitely recommend looking into it. Really can help speed up the process, not just for your PAR management, but also just inventory and cycle counting. It speeds up the process greatly. Obviously, you're not walking around with a piece of paper and then having to enter that, into a spreadsheet and then, uploading it through add-ins. You can just do it right at the spot. Scan the barcode. It's way more accurate, and you really can track the users in the system that are actually performing these counts and transactions. So really helps you have more accountability with your process. And for analytics, it's really important to when building these guidelines, building reports off of that, so you really can help measure how things are going. So this report here is, the top 20 items killed in the past year. So here it also kind of has a color background to let you know if you're, above your wanted fill rate, and then areas where you may have some issues you need to start to look into.
All right, so shall we move on from item management into sort of the first step in a chain of events, and that is our requisition.
Yes. So first things first, this is the new Rqc homepage that was added, I believe, in 10.06, and it's pretty beautiful. It's a lot of detailed information all in one home view, so you can see your templates, you can see all your punch-out vendors, your most recent recs, and then it has a nice little status bar over in the corner. So again, just a nice value add for the requester. You probably have this in place today if you're on a newer version of 10. There is a special URL that you can have default, so it automatically opens to the home page. If you haven't changed that yet, it's just going to go straight to profile, but you can see it in the upper left-hand corner. It says home, and then you can open it there.
I like that search bar that's right at the top of the Rqc homepage, right? It's very intuitive. But sometimes what might not be intuitive is what is the classification or the name of the thing I'm trying to get, right? Like here, these are pictures, right? Or are they carafes?
Oh.
So we can help our requesters out by building out synonyms in the system. So if we track it as a carafe, but everybody refers to it as a pitcher, we can sort of tie the lingo back to what our items are actually called.
Yes, definitely. And even thinking, one step further, you have to use a lot of abbreviations with the shortened item description 1 and 2. So you may have these standards in place. Hopefully you're consistent with them, but you could have cath shortened for catheter. And if your users are searching for catheter and you don't have these synonyms set up, they're not going to get the matches for cath. So something to consider to look into. If you already have those abbreviations, you could load that in right away. Basically, once you add these additional keywords and synonyms, there's a job called IC 800 that you run, and it basically takes all that data and makes it searchable. Punch out.
Yeah, another great addition to Rqc. We couldn't go through an Rqc presentation without talking about punch out. As you probably heard us say before, this is a sort of a metrics and data-driven approach to optimization. Punch out is a tool that helps us keep solid data in our system for X-type items, for specials.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's pretty easy to implement, honestly. The vendors that are approved on vendors' approved lists, there's a whole lot of them. You see a bunch of logos on here. Most popular, I'd say, is Office Supplies, and Granger's definitely really popular. But you can punch out to Dell's website, basically any vendor that has a CXML website. Basically, you're punching out to the vendor's website, utilizing their catalog that you agreed upon. They're pulling in your price, and that's coming all back into the loss and requisitioning system. and it's going to utilize your same approvals that you have in place and follow your normal process. So definitely something that you should look into. Okay.
Yeah. This is our punch out process. I think we've covered this in
Yeah.
full.
All right, moving on.
Yeah. All right, so everybody's using Rqc for supplies, but what else can I use Rqc for? What other kinds of ordering goes on that might be on paper or just not tracked in the system?
Yeah, so we see this a lot. You may just be using Requisition Center just for med-surg supplies, let's say, but you also can incorporate your capital request process. Consignment, bill only is a huge one as well. And basically just going through a design session and making sure you have the right requirements. You can configure Rqc to work with you and really have more visibility into the request process as well. So in version 10, Infor added a whole bunch of new bill-only functionality, and it's basically giving you fields to enter procedure information into instead of using comments. And they also allowed the ability for that information to be able to be translated via EDI and sent to the vendor as well. So. Yeah, basically there's just some new tweaks that you can do to update your process, and then you would update your PO 100 jobs and follow that process all the way through. We actually have a really great webinar on that, so you can find us on YouTube for more information there.
Cool. So once we get our requisition in the system, what's the next thing that happens? Well, usually our X-type recs need to go out for approval. And our system's probably going to send an email. And a lot of people that have had rec approval for a long time, right? A number of years. And they probably have email notifications that look something like this. What does this tell me? It says, go to your desk, go log in to Lawson and figure out what it is you're supposed to do. You have work to do, but it's up to you to figure out what it is and make some decisions. So as part of an optimization initiative, we like to come through and apply some 2018 styling guidelines to our rec approval, and we'll put all of the actionable information that's needed to make an approval decision right in the email, so that way our approver can take a look and see what is this requisition for, how is it coded, and who's maybe seen it already? Am I the second approver, or is somebody else going to need to approve after me? And then of course we had our approval buttons right at the bottom, so you don't need to log into a website. You can just take action right from the email.
Making it nice and easy. So not only is it sharing more information, it's doing so in a way that is organized and calling attention to the right areas, and it's beautiful, right? Nice color, nice font.
Yeah, we usually use the client's color scheme for the email layout.
Yeah, nice touch.
Yeah. So why do we care about that? Because we want to improve the amount of time that it takes on average to get approvals. Of course, if we want to make improvement, we will need to measure our average before we make a change. We need to make a change, then we need to measure our average after and see how effective that change was. So it's important to have a sort of a report or something in place that's going to allow you to frequently refresh your metrics on average approval time.
All right, next we're moving on to one of my favorite subjects, which is contract management. So one of the things that I love the most about contract management is the ability to add specials to the contract, and that will then be visible to the requester. So may not work for all of your contracts, but I'd say especially your surgical areas, your cath lab. You have this contract that has 20,000 line items on it, different screw sizes. You never know what you're going to end up using, right? And to load all that in with item master records, it's just really excessive. You just can't keep up with that, right? So this allows the requester to find that that right item at the right price from the right vendor and flow through the system. It doesn't mean that your buyers wouldn't have visibility to it before it goes out the door, if that's really what you want. It could just sit in PO23 and then you could work it from there. So either way, it just really makes the process way more efficient and getting the right compliance to not only those right items, but the right pricing, and not have to go back and forth and create buyer's messages or have that special item be entered 4 different ways and trying to tie all that together.
Yeah. Hey, sweet dashboard.
Oh, yeah.
Does this measure, speaking of contract management, does this measure percent of spend on contract?
I think it might.
Cool.
So yeah, this is the example of IBI dashboard for on and off PO spent. And here we can drill around, find more detail by service line, and then see what the trend is.
Purchase order.
All right. So our requisition has been approved. We have contracts for the items we want to order. What's our next step is we need to transmit a purchase order. Mm-hmm. All right. And the best way to do that is?
EDI. So yeah, most organizations are utilizing GHX or Vizient's tool to basically partner with vendors, suppliers, and they're basically a clearinghouse to help make that process a little bit more efficient. So it's just a way to electronically do business, which is quicker, way more accurate, and just really speeds up the process.
Right. We like EDI because it's fast and it is accurate. There's no risk of reading paper incorrectly or OCR not picking up the right data. The speed is really important because once you have in place a way to make orders same day, then that is going to lay the baseline for you to do some other improvements, like moving to more of a just-in-time inventory model. So that's going to allow you to move a low UOM JIT model, ultimately to save on the cost of stock on hand. All right, so EDI is definitely the best way to transmit purchase orders for your high volume, big prime vendors over on this side of the spectrum. And of course, we've got a lot of different kinds of purchases that we make, and there are other vendors over on this side of the spectrum that we pay with expense or service type agreements that don't have a three-way match. But what we found is that there's always a little gap in the middle where there are odd types of expenses, such as, think about picking up catering for a meeting or running out to the office supply store to get something last minute. So we're a big fan of implementing a procurement card program to sort of cover that spend, because we want to catch these odd expense invoices that take a lot of time to enter, or even worse, we want to catch these POs for no purpose, right? Like after the fact, just putting a PO in just so we have something to match against. That causes a lot of time to process all those records, and we're usually talking about low dollar amounts where it just doesn't make sense to use all that control functionality that makes sense for a more higher volume segment of purchases.
All right, so more analytics. So this is a dashboard on PO spend. This drills in by the department that's ordering. Can also dive in by location or manufacturer that's assigned to that spend, or by vendor here. So you can drill in and kind of see where your ordering spend is going, and how many POs are going out the door. Do you need to consolidate and send one PO for multiple locations versus have all of these different POs to process in the system? So it's just nice to have
a visual guide to help you make the right decisions. And
yeah, these are all good metrics to follow, and bonus points if you get them in a nice visualization, so it's quick and easy to absorb this information and see where the trouble spots are.
exactly.
All right, so once our purchase order has been issued, what happens next is we receive some product, right? And we receive it in, no, not to a room like this. No, so we want to get a handle on our receiving processes because we didn't want our supply room to look like this is our before picture, I guess.
Yes,
Yeah.
hopefully. So here, we're really recommending that you move forward with mobile supply chain for receiving and delivery. So earlier we talked about part counting and cycle counting. So there's lots of different components to RAD. There's dock logging, there's picking, there's receiving. You also can utilize miscellaneous receiving. So any kind of packages that are coming in through the receiving area that don't have POs and naturally wouldn't, but we want to track that, that coming in and out of the organization and who it's going to and the work that's being done by your staff. So this is an example of a custom report that was built to outline miscellaneous receipt detail. There's also delivery tracking, so you can do like basically badge scanning. So if you have a barcode on your badge, the receiving and delivery staff can scan that PO, get it ready for delivery, go up to the floor, scan the badge. They even can sign it if you'd like, and then you have all of that in the system. And then on top of that, you also can utilize RAD for issuing within an inventory location. So actually going through and scanning from there. And then another area that's not really widely known is RSS. So this is receiving self-service, and this is part of Requisition Center. And this is just another means to enter a receipt. It has a different user interface. So just like Rqc creates a requisition in RQ10, RSS creates the receipt in PO30. We find this is really beneficial for off-site locations that aren't really super users of the system, and PO30 feels clunky to them, and this is pretty quick and easy.
Yeah.
We typically recommend, at least for those off-site locations, that a security rule is put into place so they don't see every receipt that's available to process in the system. They just see their location.
Yeah, but for like our physician practices, by rolling this functionality out, this cuts down on the use of drop ships and helps our three-way match conform to the rest of the organization.
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, there is no PO33, so there's no means to do receiving adjustments. But again, in the scenarios of the offsite, practice areas, you probably wouldn't want them to do a adjustment anyways, and they should call someone in supply chain. So, hopefully we'll see some changes there. All right, everyone's favorite.
Yeah.
So what's R&I? This is received not invoiced. This is definitely a pain point in many organizations, and mostly because there's not a true process in place to identify the issues and work to actually clean them up in the system.
Yeah, so let's help by sharing what is our process for managing R&I. So we have, first off, we have a routine schedule of when we're running the PO 135, right? We're looking at, it's not just like what happened, what's going on with this account? Let's scramble and figure it out. So once we have our work sort of on schedule, on plan to look through this, we want to take our PO 135, export it out into an Excel spreadsheet, and cut it down into 3 parts. So the really old stuff, that I think we can just safely write off. It doesn't make a lot of sense to invest too much time in researching transactions that are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. The really young stuff, just a couple of months, Well, let's just let that work out over time by itself, right? So let's not focus too much on the real recent transactions. It's in that middle grouping that's our sweet spot. And once we put some parameters around our data to pull out our sort of middle-aged R&I records, we want to sort that by dollar amount and then work it down from the highest dollar amount down. So that way, the amount of time that we're spending looking into transactions is getting the most return on that investment.
Absolutely. And oftentimes, once you have a detailed process down, you're then digging even further. So really focusing on, is it the same item that's showing up every time? Is this one vendor, just excessively high, and kind of grouping it together that way to start, cleaning up those transactions. And then really talking through analytics for the receiving area. Again, just an area that doesn't get too much play, and it's really valuable detail. Keeping track of, what's the frequency of receipts by receiver? What time of day are you really the most busy? For those items that are being received at that by unit measure, are they also putting that away on the shelf, like for inventory items? And do you want to track that in the system as well? So this can help with just workload distribution to move some things around, or be more heavily staffed during a certain hour in the day. We talked a little bit about fill rates earlier, but just having a more detailed plan for your metrics and reporting just help you identify issues quicker and work to group those issues to people who actually can resolve them, right? So having action items for each report that you have out there. What am I supposed to do with this information?
All right, so once we've ordered and received our product, what's the last step? We need to pay. So let's take a look at some optimization techniques over in the payables area. So our accounts payable department, what's the most important thing for them, right? Is basically they need to have the skills to pay the bills so they can prevent credit hold. That's basically the worst thing that can happen from an AP department standpoint, is blocking the ordering of new supplies that we need. So that's our prime objective. That's where we want to line up our metrics to sort of measure our ability to stay far away from a possible credit hold situation. Our secondary goal is to reduce the processing cost, right? Every invoice that we process takes time and money. So we want to do everything we can to sort of increase our efficiency and get a higher volume of accurate processing with less resources. So here at RPI, we are a big proponent of what we call the democratization of information. And that means getting the information out there to people that can make sense of it and do things with it. If we look at a typical loss and security model for the accounts payable module, it's pretty limited in what you can see, right? Usually it only lets you see invoice and vendor information, and then just the minimum amount of data you need to execute a match. By opening up that security model and giving broad inquiry-only access, that enables our AP processors to really track a transaction back through the system and get context by looking at other invoices or other problematic invoices for that vendor, or maybe for that item, or maybe for that location. We even have granted inquiry access on our setup screens, because it can be helpful for an AP processor to, for reference, be able to go and look at the match table setup and any configuration settings that would sort of help a processor understand why is the system giving me this message.
Yeah, and not giving them access that they can really modify anything there, but it's giving them the tools that they need to make the right decisions, right? So more information, the better.
So one way we can get that information out there is the what they call the Rqc or Rqc Payment Mingle contextual app. This is just a a box that slides out on the right-hand side of the screen, and it brings together a lot of information that you could get normally through the drill, but by bringing it to sort of the forefront of the screen, makes it easier to just sort of draw connections and get some big picture information for an individual transaction.
Yeah, so who was the requester for this purchase order? You have to drill into the source line detail. Here it's just telling you. And it's telling you the requester name and the number and what status it's in, all the way down. And it does this in all of these screens. So this just isn't a view in PO20 for your purchase order. You also can do the same for the requisition and receiving screens as well.
All right, so we found that it's super important to have a collaborative effort working with accounts payable and purchasing together to sort of workshop what are our common problems, and how can we find the root causes of those and sort of change our policies, because there's a lot of interaction between these two groups, and they don't necessarily see each other all the time. Maybe they're in different locations. They don't have a reason to maybe communicate every day, but what we do on one side, it definitely affects what happens on the other side.
Yeah, so working together as a team, understanding each other's pain points, I feel like it takes a little bit, right? Especially if you don't have that in place today and there are some issues there, really making an initiative to make that better, because again, your work affects one another, and the more that you can understand, why something's being processed a certain way really helps you when you're processing the rest of the transaction. So, these working sessions, you could cover things like R&Is or increased buyer messages. We've also seen receiving get brought in to these discussions as well, because they're a part of the process.
Yeah.
So,
when we do our discovery and start talking to procurement people, to accounts payable people, we get a lot of anecdotal evidence about what's not working or where the problems are, and a lot of that comes from the way that we process, say, buyers' messages is sort of one at a time, and each message that we work through that might give us a data point, here, and it can be hard to draw connections between those data points. So that's why it's important to do analysis on this data, and we want to pull all our buyers' messages and start looking for trends and looking for connections. Only by looking at the data set as a whole, rather than each individual transaction as I need to work it, can we truly pull out from the big picture and get context of what are our root causes.
Yes, just taking a step back. We can be so transactional, just working through the issues, and you could be stopping them if you just took a step back and, rather than just keep spinning the wheel.
So, we've got our matching process down. What's the final piece here is we're going to issue payment to the vendor. So let's not forget about that in our optimization initiatives here. What we want to do here is take a look at how we're paying invoices on time or not on time. And from a data standpoint, what we've done is we've taken all of our invoices that match a certain set of terms. Here we're looking at our net 30 invoices, and we want to do a quick calculation on each one to show the payment date compared to the invoice date. All right, and we'll graph out our volume here, and we're looking to see a curve something like this. This is what I consider, maybe an optimal distribution, where we're paying, many or all of our invoices on time, and we're coming in before our net 30 terms. But you can see that we've pushed out that payment date as close to our due date as possible, so that way we're practicing good cash management. We're not giving money away earlier than we need to, and taking advantage of our terms. Once we have a curve that looks good, like this, maybe then we can go back to our vendors and try and negotiate for discount terms. So here we've graphed out a typical, say, discount terms of, say 2%, 10, net 45. And again, we'll see the same distribution here. And this is going to help us if we automate the building of these types of metrics and then compare, vendor by vendor, or look at, paper versus electronic invoices and what have you. This will help bring to the forefront individual vendors or kinds of invoices that we can maybe spend a little bit more time or attention to make the most out of our cash management strategies. And as tying it back to the beginning, preventing any possibility of a credit hold. So our accounts payable department definitely benefits from some objective analysis, just as we've done all through the procurement lifecycle. Here's a handful of sort of key performance indicators within AP. And one way that we can sort of get a good picture of our AP processing chain of events is to sort of graph out the workflow that a typical invoice goes through, and then measure some times that average out for each step along the way. So if we take a look at the next slide, here's an example of such a report. So we've graphed out the various steps that need to happen for an invoice to be entered into the system, approved or matched, and ultimately paid. And now we've mashed up data from our workflow system that's managing invoices. Maybe that's IPA, or maybe that's your document imaging system. We've mashed up data between our workflow system that tells us how long does it take for an invoice to move around, and then tie that back to our AP invoice data so we can bring in dollar amounts, vendor names, operator names, a method of how invoices came into the system. And by graphing it out this way, we can easily see sort of where are the trouble points, where are things getting hung up along the process, and where do we want to focus our efforts to improve efficiency. All right, well, that's been quite a journey through the P2P life cycle here. Now, I mean, these are a lot of different little techniques or strategies that we've shared today, and we've dropped a lot of metrics along the way. This can seem daunting, and it's the question is, where do we start? So what we've done is sort of wrap all of this around a P2P assessment initiative. You're passionate about assessments in the P2P area. Would you like to share your methodology?
I would love to. So yeah, we've been doing a lot of these optimization assessments, and like you were saying, it's a really great way to get a full picture of your current state and help you to prioritize these initiatives and really create a roadmap together. So as part of these projects, during the current state discovery process, we're basically interviewing staff members. We're doing shadowing. We're also diving into your system, looking at your setup. You may have, implemented Lawson many years ago, and you don't necessarily understand why the system was set up the way that it was. You weren't there during initial implementation, but you feel like it's causing you some pain points. We're also looking through transactional detail to get a better understanding of what's actually, happening in the system. Then we go and while we're on site, you may be experiencing a certain issue while we're there, and we're able to help you resolve it right away. Maybe you're looking for a certain detail in a report and you didn't know that one exists, and we're going to tell you what that is right away. We call those quick wins. So from there, once we go through the observations, we're really focusing in on future state recommendations. So those are graded with value and effort scales. So what we're recommending could be something that you can easily do yourself at low effort and medium value, and you're going to want to go ahead and do that right away. So this really empowers you to do that yourself. Along with the value and effort scales, they're tied to initiatives. So there may be multiple different recommendations all about, requisition center optimization. And within that, you'll have your own priorities of which ones of those you want to move forward with right away. So again, it could be something like you're using requisition center now. We're recommending a few configuration changes to help with the requester experience, but you also still have a paper process for capital. Let's fix that so you have better visibility into what's being used with these activities, what's being approved, and really getting a better handle over that process. So that also is a lot of information, right? There's a lot of detail that we're going to be sharing, and when we're presenting these recommendations to you, we really want to have a collaborative discussion and build your strategic roadmap together. There can be a lot going on at your organization that has nothing to do with your ERP system. You could be optimizing your Procure-to-Pay process with other applications, and you're in the middle of implementation. What we're recommending, we think could be done in 3 months. That resource may be assigned to another project. So we're really working with you to make sure that is an actionable roadmap, and you can start moving forward with the recommendations. As Richard was mentioning earlier, getting a good current state, KPI, and then going back, a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, a year later, and really seeing where those improvements were.
Yeah, it's important to measure before, during, and after consistent and regular analytics so we can spot trends and see what's working and what's not. So here's an example of our value versus effort quadrant here, and we've graphed out some of our roadmap items, some recommendations that arose during our assessment. And this really gives us a clear picture of where we need to focus and what items we need to work on now and what items we can wait, maybe put on the back burner.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much for sharing your assessment strategy, and I hope that our audience has taken away some different things that they can do in their organization to improve their P2P operations. Do we have any questions?
We do have a question related to the screenshot of the IPA approval email. Are you not requiring login from the rec approval emails? How to authenticate the approver did not forward the email and that someone else is approving?
Great question.
Yeah, so typically we do enable the requirement that you would have to authenticate to the system. If you've got, if you have Portal Open or Mingle open already, usually you're already logged in, so we can click approve and we don't need to type our password again. Otherwise, you'll have to authenticate before taking action. Of course, we want to compare the person the email was sent to versus the login we got back from that action. Maybe they forwarded the email, or maybe it's more of like a proxy approver type situation, just so we know that the authenticated actor actually does meet our fiscal approval policy.
All right, that's all the questions we have for today. I want to thank you very much, Ms. Stephanie Cole, Mr. Richard Stout.